So this unit is 4 officers. They will work from 7 in the morning till midnight in 2 shifts. Okay, so they'll work in pairs. That will allow us to give us maximum coverage. Our workload curve starts at 7 in the morning and it goes till midnight. We know from the data that we can look at in terms of the calls and the priority calls for service that really that's when they are at their greatest and at their highest. So that's why we will match our staffing to the demand for work.
So yeah, property crime is, sorry, what was kind of the hour range where property crime was happening the most?
Not when the crimes are happening, but when total calls are happening, right? So keep in mind that when crime happens, if it's after midnight or somebody goes through your car, you don't discover that till 7 in the morning. Right? So what we need to do is we need to have officers who are available to start doing those investigations. We need officers who are available when they can interview people, when they can go and collect evidence. That's why they will be working during those times of the day. I don't have enough officers to do 24/7 coverage, but I do have enough to give us this coverage.
And so that'll be 2 teams of 2, Monday to Friday?
They will actually work multiple days on a rotating shift, a 3-week rotation. There might be a day or here where we don't have one of those teams that's currently working. But the fact is I just don't have enough people to be able to do that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I can maximize our coverage using the people I have by staggering the shifts in the way that I've described.
And we have an idea just of how often we're seeing property crime cases?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I know we're going to provide you with a release here afterwards, which will have some of those statistics brought into it. I can certainly give you some of that right now. I went back and looked at the last quarter, so the 3rd quarter of 2023. Okay. And I looked at, for example, and this is one that's on everybody's mind, bicycle thefts, right? So how many have we had in terms of bicycle thefts? We've had 56 bicycle thefts in the 3rd quarter of 2023 in this city. Okay. With the highest being in August, where we had 21 bicycles stolen. Right? Who's investigating those? We need those investigated. We had shoplifting. We had 113 reported incidents of shoplifting in the month of August alone. Were there more? Could very well be that it's an underreported crime. Okay? But that gets a lower priority in terms of a response when I have somebody who's being assaulted, or if I have a domestic dispute. Those things, the community has said we're not getting a quick police response. I want a quick police response. I want an investigation. I want this to be brought to a conclusion because it's what the community deserves. It's what I want to be able to provide them.
And you mentioned, many times this might be kind of the same offender, but what's supposed to reassure businesses as well as residents that, that won't continue to happen when we're heard so much about bail issues and things like that?
Well, we're going to do our part. And that's the part we can do is we can try and identify, we can try and charge people as it's appropriate. And then when some of these folks are before the courts, that's where it really is out of our control and our ability to deal with. In terms of court priority, they're not dissimilar to us in terms of where are their priorities at. I can't speak to how they will be able to respond to what I will hope to be an increased number of people coming before the courts who are being brought before the courts for these types of crimes, but I imagine it will be a challenge. Yeah. So right now, as I mentioned, officers are assigned property occurrences. They're assigned online reports. They go into what's called a gray card or a task list. When an officer starts their shift, they have a certain number of those that are sitting there waiting for them at the beginning of their shift. Okay? As those are sitting there waiting to be responded to, waiting to be investigated, waiting to be followed up on, they're being dispatched to motor vehicle collisions. They're being dispatched to assault calls, to other crimes in progress. That means that the calls that have been waiting when they start at the beginning of their day, these lower priority calls, tend to become very difficult for them to actually get to. As you can imagine, when an officer has time, it's usually about 2 o'clock in the morning. And nobody is awake at that time of the day to receive a call from a police officer to say, I'm here to investigate, your theft of a bicycle, or I'm here to talk about the shoplifting. So I want to be able to provide officers that are available and working when people are available and when people are working, so that we can be responsive to the needs. I believe we can do better.
I was going to say, if anything, is this another prime example? Like you mentioned that obviously even without, I guess, the additional funding, you're still going to launch this task force, at least in the short term. But would you say that this, again, is an example of where you guys need that increased budget, obviously, in order to be able to tackle these less severe crimes that are still very important to people?
Yeah, and I won't even call this a task force because I am optimistic that we will receive the funding we need to be able to provide this type of service. Okay, so this is a team, and once we have secured the funding for that, it will become a permanent team. And this is exactly what we need to be able to do. It's exactly why we haven't been able to do these types of investigations. We have limited numbers of resources. We talked about 11 officers on the road during a day shift. Okay? And that's not on the road. That's just deployed as a minimum staffing. One goes to Lakefield because they pay for that officer. One goes to Cavan because they pay for that officer. One is on the front desk. That's 8 officers for the city of Peterborough that's left. I don't have people to go out and do this, but I can, through this process, put 4 more people in place.
Yeah, so as part of this, you said a few different things to describe it this way, but low priority when used more than once. I think that, to me, that just means it's lower risk than these things like motor collisions and violent crime. Is that in any sort of way an indication that these jobs can be in part done by non-uniformed citizen staff as opposed to uniformed police officers?
It does not. These are jobs required by police officers. Non-uniform or civilian staff do not have the authority to go out and arrest somebody. Right? Do not have those authorities. Police officers do. Right? So that's a problem for us that we have to be able to address. Keep in mind, these are also fully armed, fully capable officers. If a call comes in that's of an extremely high or an emergent nature, for example, we've had 4 homicides this year. When that call comes in, no matter what these officers are doing, they will drop everything they're doing to respond to that. If somebody's being attacked with a knife, being attacked with a weapon, these officers will be expected to respond. If I put out civilian members who are trying to do that, they do nothing for us in terms of overall community safety. This provides not only the layer of investigative response and immediate follow-up to these types of calls, but it also provides us the ability to put forward additional resources in an emergency. Now, let's talk about priority. So low priority in terms of how we dispatch those types of calls. Right? Your highest priority is threat to life. Somebody's life is in threat, that's a priority 1. That's the officers going lights and sirens to a call for service. You can bet if we're doing that, it's an emergency. It's a priority 2 if it's still a violent crime, but maybe there isn't an immediate threat to violence at that particular moment. Somebody's been assaulted, but the suspect's gone. Right? These types of crimes tend to come down to priority 3, priority 4, those types of things, because often there isn't a suspect present, and quite often it's about property, and it could be anything as small as $20 or a $5 shoplifting, right? Or a broken window. It requires some investigative follow-up, but it doesn't have the same threat to life, and that's the prioritization. Yeah.
Have we seen a precedence like this happen anywhere in the country as past the issues that you've done before?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I worked in a unit similar to this when I was in policing in the front line many, many years ago. It wasn't quite the same as this, but it's not dissimilar. So I'm trying to draw from my experience, trying to leverage what I can bring with me from past practice and through my own lived experiences in terms of policing to how we can be better here in Peterborough. So part of the reason I was brought here is to bring in different ideas, to think a little differently, what's worked elsewhere, what's an evidence-based response to these types of crimes, and how do we make it work here? This is how I can make it work. Absolutely.
Now, this is just kind of a little speculative, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just curious. Is part of the issue with some of these, property theft kind of situations, like anything, like from what I've understood, theft under 1,000 really doesn't end up with anybody actually going to jail, or it's not really viewed as much of a crime almost. Well, it is a crime, but it's difficult to actually prosecute from what I've understood in courts. So are people who actually are getting stopped for like a $20 shoplifting charge, are they really going to jail? Yeah. Are they being put before court, or is it kind of getting tossed?
So the threshold's actually 5,000, right? So that's where you're going to get, and you'll see in the statistics, theft under 5,000, theft over 5,000. That's a criminal code, and that's a uniform crime reporting threshold. So that's what we use, and that's what we'll use to sort of differentiate this. Our responsibility is reasonable, probable grounds that a crime took place and that we have a suspect. And if we can put it all together, we can arrest and lay the charge. The courts look at reasonable prospect of conviction What are the likelihood that we'll be able to convict somebody on here? And then they have to weigh what are the I guess for them, the pressures in terms of the best use of the court time, right? If they're prosecuting somebody who's accused of sexual assault versus a $20 shoplifting, I know where they're going to put their resources.
Well, yeah.
That I can't worry about. I have to just worry about what I can do for the community because that's my lane. We're about public safety and I have to be able to provide that. As far as I'm concerned, that's what adequate and effective policing is. That's what I'm driving here.
I just wondered if that was maybe part of the reason petty theft often kind of goes under the radar or doesn't really, like, you know, the person gets back out on the street.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned that.
It's frustrating. It's frustrating for officers. It's frustrating for the community. But we have to rise above that because we still have our job to do, and I expect that we'll do it. And I expect this is a good start. And what I want is I want people to know when they see this coming, these shirts, there's an officer out there who's investigating this type of crime. Yeah.
Everybody good?